The first chapter is titled The Person and the Sexual Urge, and it's divided into two sections. And the first section, which we'll go over now, is titled The Analysis of the Verb to Use. And it looks at what the person is and how we're supposed to treat a person. And the next section is called, I think, the sexual urge. And so it takes take a look at that and how we interpret it. So the first subsection under analysis of the verb use is called the person as the subject and object of action. Okay. Part of that subsection, Pope John Paul II, he devotes to writing about how unique the human person is as compared to everything else. And this is a theme he develops a little bit more in Theology of the Body. We are alone. Humans are, Adam realized he was alone in the sense of he's unique. And so there's a uniqueness of man. And what Pope John Paul II points to is the interiority that he calls what he calls interiority. That's where he is absolutely unique. There's an interior life and a value. And so, as a human being, it's obvious when we're the subjects. Like whatever I do, I'm the subject. If I eat, if I read, if I talk, I'm the subject doing these actions. And whatever I do, whether I read a book or I'm talking to right now, it's just a computer I'm talking to. But the objects are things I'm using. I have my phone, I'm using the phone. And so I'm the subject and there's the object I use. But the point of this section is that when the object of our action is another human being with his or her own interior life and all his thoughts and actions, then the way we go about in our actions have to be different. It has to abide by certain principles. And when it comes to other things, it makes sense to just use it according to how we want to or how we should. But when it comes to another person, when the object is not just an inanimate object or an animal or even an animal, but another human being, then the way we relate to and go about in our interaction with that object is different. And so that's where this section really, it gets into all of that. So the next subsection is the first meaning of the verb to use. Okay. And he defines the first meaning of the first sense of the verb to use as to employ as a means to an end. He's obviously talking about things we are not supposed to be doing when it comes to another human being. But he mentions specific examples where there is, a certain way. He cites certain examples where one person does use another person. In an example of a military, the commanding officer uses the soldiers. In the case of an employer, the employer uses employees for a certain amount of certain goals. And then he even mentions parents and children. Parents in a sense use children and in raising them towards certain goals they have in mind, etc. And certainly there is uh, the sense of using between a man and a woman, and because we use each other for whatever ends. And so he makes the point that we are not supposed to treat people merely as a means to an end. Okay? So when it comes to another human being, we shouldn't be using them just as a means to some end we have in mind. And he mentions the fact that even God does not use us. He has a right to, but he doesn't. And he gave us free will. He gives us a choice to participate in what he wants us to do. Okay, so he has some goal for us in mind, but he doesn't force us. He allows us to have the free choice to participate in that vision he has for us. And of course, what he wants for us is himself, the greatest good. But even that, he doesn't force it upon us. He allows us to choose it. So even God does not use us, merely use us. And so we should never use another human being just as a means to an end. The next section kind of addresses then how should we uh, act. So what is the solution to all of this? And the next section is titled Love as the Opposite of Using. So we know what not to do, but what do we do? What so what do we do when the object of my action is a human being? And that's where love comes into the picture. And if we love another human being, then that's what uh, helps us, prevents us from just using that person as a means to an end. And even then, there's some type of, seemingly use going on. But what he says, particularly in, he gives an example when it comes to the relations between a man and a woman. Uh, it's important that the man and the woman in the marriage, they need to have a common goal, common good, common goal, and common vision that they work towards. That they work towards, and if they do, then it wouldn't be two people just using each other merely as a means to an end. It'd be two people respecting each other's goals, and if two people have the same goal, then same vision of how they are to relate, where they're headed, and how they're helping each other, then it wouldn't be using. It would be loving each other and helping each other. So in the examples mentioned in the previous section, um, there is the military example, commanding officer and soldiers. If they both accept their given roles and they both have the goal of fighting this battle and winning or protecting, then it's not merely using each other as means to an end. They both have a common vision, and they both have a common vision. They're helping each other in that. Same thing with the employer and the employee. If they both freely accept their given roles and what they're doing, and they both wanna, like like sell products or run this business and earn money, and I'm okay with this much, and all of that, then they are helping each other, accomplish each other's goal and working towards that same vision. And certainly true in marriage, and two people have to have a common vision of what their marriage is. We want to have children. We want to help each other. Uh, we want to grow closer together. We want to help each other grow in holiness, and we want to help each other get to heaven. If they have these common goals and that's what they're doing, and they both know how they're contributing to that goal and helping each other, then they wouldn't merely be using each other. They would be loving each other and helping each other towards that common vision, that common goal, that common good. Um, the tendency to use, he says, is particularly more present in a sexual relationship between a man and a woman. Um, for obvious reasons. And so, this is why this vision of love is important, so that a relationship does not break down into one of use. The next subsection is titled The Second Meaning of the Verb to Use. And the first meaning of the verb to use means to employ as a means to an end. So if I use you, it means I'm using you as a means to an end. I'm employing you as a means to an end. And the second definition, second meaning of the verb to use is to experience pleasure from. So if I experience pleasure from my interaction with another person, then I can, in a sense, be using that person. He talks about the sexual life and he makes a distinction between animals and humans. For animals, the sexual life is on the natural and instinctive level. It's something natural and it's just instinctive. They just follow whatever, in a sense, their emotions drive them to do. It leads to procreation. They don't think about what they're doing. It leads them to just instinctively, engage in the sexual act. For humans, he says, our sexual life is on a personal and moral level. It's there's an element of that other person and that moral level. I mean, we're aware of what we're doing. We're aware of who we are. There's another person who also has an interior life, and and our awareness and our will, all that comes into play. So there's a moral element. We can make it good or bad. And so, there's a huge distinction. Even though in modern times, it's we almost think of it the same way, but that distinction is very important. That personal element and the moral element. It's another person who is the object of my actions. And so there's a big moral element. It could be something really good, or I can make it bad. He says, because we are aware of our pleasure, it can an experience. And so in the context of a sexual relationship, there's an awareness of what's happening and what I experience. And I know that the pleasure I feel is part of it. So that can lead me to seek that pleasure. And when that pleasure becomes something I go after, then inevitably the other person will become an object of my use. And of course, like the first meaning of the verb to use, we overcome this through love. And he says by caring. But even there, he points out the danger of using a person under the pretense of caring and loving kindness. So, I can call it caring and loving kindness, but what I'm really after is the pleasure. And so there's a danger of that. And we may not be even aware of that. And this leads to the next section, um, through which we analyze this problem more in depth. The next subsection is called the critique of utilitarianism. And utilitarianism is the system of ethics. So ethics, I mean, it's a branch of philosophy, or you don't even have to think about philosophically. It's just what determines right and wrong. What determines what is good and bad. And I mean, to put it broadly, I mean, what we believe is an objective morality, and regardless of what I feel, what I think, what my opinions are, certain things are good and certain things are bad. A subjective morality is, as the word says, is based on the subject. The subject, I kind of decide what's good, what's bad. And a lot can kind of be related to that. And utilitarianism is a system of ethics that's based on uh, the consequence of my actions. Okay, so the way to define that would be what's good or bad is defined by whether it leads to uh, like pleasure. So they would say the greatest good for the greatest number, or the greatest happiness for the greatest number. And so but they defined um, the happiness or the goodness as pleasure. Like that's the part that's distinctively bad. They want a maximum amount of pleasure for the maximum amount of people. Like that's the principle of utilitarianism. So, you know, they want to go after what's useful, but what's useful is, the happiness, or the way they define happiness is pleasure. And so by trying to maximize pleasure, that's what's useful. That's what's maximizes utility, maximizing the pleasure. Like That's the system of ethics that is bad. So under this system, there can be two people who are just after pleasure, and two people are using each other and for pleasure. The let's take the case of a sexual relationship. The man experiences pleasure from the woman. The woman, the same, vice versa, experiences pleasure from the man, sexually and beyond sexually. And in that relationship, they're in a sense using each other. But because under this utilitarian way of thinking, they're maximizing each other's pleasure, they may think what they're doing is good. And that's the danger. By focusing on pleasure and going after that and trying to maximize that, then we run into a system of ethics where we use each other and love is lost. That takes us to the last subsection of this section. And this is a very important section. The commandment to love and the personalistic norm. Okay. And so it can be stated in the negative aspect and the positive aspect. Negative aspect meaning, don't do this. Positive meaning, do this. So negative aspect of the personalistic norm is this. The person is the kind of good which does not admit of use and cannot be treated as an object of use, and as such the means to an end. In other words, you are not supposed to use a person. Never just use a person. Never treat a person just as a means to an end. On the flip side, so what do? The person is a good towards which the only proper and adequate attitude is love. So in other words, how should you treat a person? With love, as an end in himself or in herself. It's a person with his own desires and goals and thoughts and wants, and so you should respect that. And so you treat the person with love. And this is the idea on which the foundation of kind of this whole book. A person is not to be used. A person is to be loved, treated as an end, not as a means. And so this is a fundamental idea. And one of the famous insights that gets quoted from this book is, what is the opposite of love? People typically will associate the opposite of love with hate, implying that love is some type of strong positive emotion. But no, the opposite of love is to use. Using a person is what you should never do. And that also gives us an insight into what love is. And so this is a personalistic norm, never treating a person as a means to an end, never using a person, but treating a person with love, knowing that a person is a good towards which the only proper and adequate attitude is love. And so that's a personalistic norm, and this is what's compatible with the great commandment to love from the gospel. And the utilitarian way of thinking, which we may fall into without even realizing it, this tendency to, place pleasure, maximizing pleasure at the forefront or in the background, that's what leads to deterioration of love. And so that concludes the first section, and so that'll lead us to the next section, which we'll look at, which is the sexual urge and the interpretations of it.